Good morning and welcome to Spotlight. Now that the pink wave hit Michigan on Election Day, where does our state and new leaders go from here? We'll ask media experts Bankole Thompson of the Detroit News and the Pulse Institute, and Cindy Goodacre, formerly of Crane's Detroit Business, now of Inform, the powerful women's group here in our state. And later, I'll sit down with Saskia Thompson, the relatively new executive director of the sometimes controversial Detroit Land Bank. It's Sunday, November the 11th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. Thank you for coming in and joining us today on Spotlight. 2 words to describe campaign 2018 here in Michigan. Cindy?
I would say, 2 words. Well, yeah. I'll pile on pink wave.
Pink wave, okay. Bankole?
Blue wave.
Blue wave.
Yes.
Okay, all right, very good. What's the headline from this one? What's the takeaway?
I think the takeaway is that when women decide to become involved politically, they can be successful.
All right. Bankole?
Well, the takeaway is that fear is not a way to control people, and that you know, whenever you create an atmosphere of fear, people are going to push back. And I think what we saw on Tuesday was a rebuke of the what I call the political climate that we find ourselves in. And honestly, Chuck, when you listen to the tremors, when you listen to just how charged the atmosphere is, the racism, the xenophobia, the anti-Semitism, and this is not a stretch. I mean, for black folks, we asked ourselves, is this another Reconstruction for people of color, for black people, you know, where you have to question your own national identity in the land of the free and the home of the brave? And I think Tuesday's election reaffirmed for people that, you know, you don't have to be fearful, you don't have to be afraid. All you have to do is exercise that sacred franchise. Yeah,
you can do a lot in the ballot box.
Right.
Cindy Goodacre, we're going to see that photo op in just a minute with Gretchen Whitmer and Dana Nessel and Jocelyn Benson and Debbie Stabenow. That's a big photographic difference from what we've seen over the last 8 years, a political party as well as gender.
Right, and I think from our standpoint, we look more at participation than political party. But what you see here are women who have worked hard at becoming successful in politics and have been successful in politics. This is, you know, Senator Stabenow being reelected. And I think what we've seen is that voters like strong women candidates and that women have a lot to bring to the table.
And this comparison that we heard all through the campaign, Whitmer and Granholm, how's that being received by Inform and women in your organization? Because I've heard a lot of interesting comments. And now that she's going to be the next governor, the second female governor of this state, should that comparison stop?
That's the kind of comparison that happens when a sample size is small. So you have your second woman governor, she gets compared to the first woman governor, which may or may not be appropriate. So I think she really needs to be compared to her own record at this point as she moves forward. Yeah,
and this is someone, Bankole, who is well steeped in the legislature. I mean, she's a product of the Michigan legislature. Granholm came in sort of an outsider, even campaigned as an outsider to the system. Gretchen Whitmer has been on key committees. She was minority leader of the Senate. You don't get to that position by not knowing how to play the game in Lansing.
Well, you're right. She's a product of the institution of the legislature in Lansing. Unlike Granholm, who came out of the McNamara machine, there are 2 distinctions here, and I think that helps Gretchen in terms of navigating the waters. Because I remember when Granholm was governor. I mean, you know, we talked about whether Andy Dillon, Speaker, was able to marshal the soldiers in the House enough to support Granholm. And one of the weaknesses of Jennifer Granholm was the fact that she was not a product of that institution. So I think with Gretchen being a product of the institution itself, I think she can walk across the line, and she's already offered an olive branch. I attended a press conference she did the day after after her election, basically saying that she may, in fact, include some Republicans in her cabinet. But what we're looking for, Chuck, especially for folks like me, is how she tackles the issue of poverty. She mentioned in the press briefing that this is an issue that she's concerned about, and I wrote about it in my column in the Detroit News that, you know, she talked about appointing a poverty secretary, a cabinet level. Right. This will be the first time, Chuck, in modern Michigan history to have a governor who appoints a cabinet level poverty secretary to really deal with this issue of income inequality.
Well, the first thing she better do is fix the DAMN roads, right?
That is true.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And on some of the things that she campaigned on, people agree about the issues. I think everyone wants the roads fixed. That's not a Republican or a Democratic issue.
Yeah. Does she run a very smart race? I mean, the easy answer is yes, because she won. But this is someone who spent time in Grand Rapids. Mm-hmm. You know, she was educated, lived in Grand Rapids, graduated from high school over in Grand Rapids, then went to East Lansing. So she knew that side of the state. She had relationships with that side of the state. She handled Detroit and some of its leaders pretty well. I think early on when Mike Duggan and some of the others sort of challenged whether or not she should even be the nominee. Right. And she dealt with that situation very, very well. Bankley, she's shown some political moxie, hasn't she?
She did. In fact, Chuck, on the victory night, I was at the Democratic camp covering that, and one of her major supporters said, well, you know, she's no lightweight, that she can fight back. And I think we saw that when, you know, the machinations of Mayor Mike Duggan tried to, you know, see if they could replace her on the ticket. She did not budge. She did not move. So I think she understands this business. I mean, so she's not a student, right? She's not, you know, a kindergarten in politics. So I think she knows what it will take to do this. And, you know, she's already offering an olive branch. There are some folks who say, well, you know, she just got elected. Why are you offering an olive branch? Well, you know, I mean, that's part of governance, you know, as long as you stick to what your message is. But I think the key here is, though, is whether she's able to fulfill those campaign promises. Yes, the legislature is still the other party itself. So that's going to be a tough it's going to be, the next 4 years is going to be tough. It's not going to be rosy because it's going to be a give and take. There has to be compromise somehow.
All right, hang on. I got to get to a little break. We'll come back. We'll talk about some of these other key races that we saw going on and some of the history making that took place in this state as well. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Spotlight. Garland Gilchrist, first African-American lieutenant governor of this state. Cindy, what are you reading today?
I read that I read that the incoming governor chose a good partner for to help her execute her agenda, execute her plans.
And Bankley, what does he have to deliver for Granholm and for this state going into being in charge of the Senate? He's never operated in that body before.
No, he's not. And I think, you know, some of us raised the experience question on that. But I think, you know, Garland, I understand, is a quick study. He's a quick learner. So I'm sure.
And he helped deliver Detroit and Wayne County, which is what he was on that ticket to do.
That's right. He helped
in other urban areas.
And other urban areas. But I think he's a quick study. So I guess he's studying right now in terms of what he's going to do when he gets there, because it's going to be tough.
You talk to Arthur Orwitz on a pretty frequent basis. Does he have some mending the fences to do in the Jewish community?
That question came out of nowhere. You know, I think he'll have to do some mending the fences. I think in what happened, you know, with his remarks about Israel and on his street of feet and so forth, and it did not get the kind of traction in the campaign, because I think a lot of people were focused on just the national climate itself. And honestly, Chuck, I think Trump helped Gretchen and Garland. People were looking at what the president has done. So, you know, I'm sure at some point they will address those. Yeah. Yeah.
Debbie Stabenow, race a lot closer than I think a lot of people thought. Why? What does this mean for John James? What's next? His speech at the end sounded very much like, you haven't seen the last of me.
Well, he's young, so it makes sense that he would look forward to his future and perhaps future races, perhaps other opportunities. But I think Senator Stabenow, this was a, you know, this was always going to be a tough race. This is Michigan voted for Trump in you know, in the election, and so it was her job to come and say, this is why I deserve to return, and I think she made that case.
What are you hearing from women? Should Nancy Pelosi be the next speaker? Because on paper, she's in line to become speaker again. Is that good or bad? You had Slotkin saying, I don't want her to be the next speaker. I just upset an incumbent. I'm coming in as a Democratic woman. There's going to be some real debate in Washington over that. By the same token, who better to take on President Trump than the person he's criticized throughout the entire campaign?
Well, women are not a monolithic group. You know, they have a range of views, they have a range of priorities, and so whether Nancy Pelosi continues in, you know, in her role will depend on what her party, what her constituents think that she should do, her constituents in Congress.
Right. Maxine Waters may be playing a role in this?
Oh yeah, I think she's set to become the chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee, which, Chuck, you know, has oversight over the banking industry.
Do the investigations start right away?
She could. You know, Maxine don't play. You know, she's courageous, she's been a fighter, she's a product of that institution in Congress, and she brings an incredible civil rights background, you know, and a higher level of consciousness when it comes to the rights of people. She's a defender of women's rights, you know, and she is, you know, she's a hero.
Cindy Goodacre, I'll give you the last word. A record number of women elected in this country, a record number going to Congress, and tremendous diversity of which we have not seen before in the halls of Congress. What's the message?
I think the message is that the work has just begun. It is a record number, but women are still 22%. They went from 20 to 22% of Congress. So there's still room for progress. There's still room for women to be engaged in both political parties and in other ways as well. So I think the work has just begun.
All right, stay tuned. All right, it's going to be an interesting 2 years and 4 years here in Michigan, and we'll have to see what happens when the presidential election comes around in 2020. Cindy Goodacre, thank you so much for coming in, representing Inform. Banker Thompson, thank you for the Detroit News and for the Pulse Institute. And we'll be back in a second, and we'll sit down with the relatively new executive director of the Detroit Land Bank. We hope you stay with us. And welcome to Spotlight. I can't think of a topic that touches the heart and the soul of neighborhoods more than home ownership or renting or wherever you're living. And the person with me this morning is going to talk a little bit about that. Her name is Saskia Thompson, and she is the executive director of the Detroit Land Bank. Welcome to Spotlight.
Happy to be here.
First time having you here. We're glad to have you. I know that you're originally from Detroit, grew up in Detroit, Rosedale Park neighborhood?
Rosedale Park. Yep.
All right.
Cass Tech.
Cass Tech? Oh my God, you're one of those, what do they call them, the Cass technicians?
That's us.
All right. You know, you meet people from Cass Tech and they think there's no other school other than Cass Tech, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Very proud school, and for good reason. You lived in Philadelphia, did similar work there, as well as Charlotte, North Carolina. Have a favorite among those cities?
Well, of course, I would say that Detroit is my favorite.
Smart lady. Okay.
I did enjoy. It was good to do this sort of work in other cities and then take that experience and bring it back home. Of course, I started my career in Detroit, so
sure.
That's how I decided I wanted to do this sort of work, was because I grew up here, and then to take that experience and learn from what's happening in other cities and then to bring it all back has been a really good experience.
Yeah, but I find a lot of times it's good to get away.
It is.
So that your vision isn't sort of reduced to the length of your nose. You see best practices in other places, and sometimes it gives you a different perspective when you come back to the place that you were raised.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I went to Charlotte in 2002, it was a city that was experiencing tremendous growth. And of course in Detroit at the time, we were experiencing the exact opposite when I left Detroit. So just seeing, you know, the decisions that you have the authority to make when you're in this sort of work, what the city officials are doing, and how Charlotte addressed, how they addressed making sure that growth was done responsibly and in a smart way, and then kind of think about that now that Detroit is, we're not a shrinking city anymore. We're not going to be as big as we used to be, but to think smartly about what we do now and how we renovate our neighborhoods.
Ms. Thompson, what's the best part of your job?
The best part of my job, aside from the fact that I get to work with really great people, which I absolutely do, I think the best part of my job is the knowledge that we are actually putting houses that in some cases have been vacant and abandoned for years back into productive use. Like putting a family back in a house is just
making
really,
a house a home.
Yeah, it's a great experience. And to know that while we're doing that one house at a time, that the impact we're starting to see is that neighborhoods are coming back, not just individual structures. We only work in neighborhoods. I mean, all of the really exciting and wonderful things that you see going on in downtown and midtown, that's great. That's not where our core business is. Our core business,
even though downtown and midtown's a neighborhood, right, that's not your concentration.
Our concentration is the rest of the city.
Your organization, you manage or oversee about 100,000 parcels. That's a lot.
It is.
That's a lot for anybody to watch. I don't care how big your staff is. That's got to also, while it's a challenge, it's got to also be sort of a nightmare because there's so much. There's no way you can stop bad news stories from creeping in there from time to time. And it's trying to strike that balance so that you hopefully have more good news stories than bad news stories. Do you have a department big enough to manage what's on your plate?
I think we do. We might need to grow slightly, but I think overall we've built, it took some time. You know, the land bank was there were no models to follow. There's no other land bank in the country that has 94,000 properties to manage. We are the largest in that way. So
largest in the nation.
Largest land bank, yes. Other cities don't have this much public ownership, so it took some time to figure out how to get that done. So land bank has been operating in this manner with this number of properties for about 4 years, a little bit more, and now we're starting to see what the land bank can actually do with the team that it's built. You know, we have an inventory department that takes in the properties, assesses them, figures out is there a structure on it? Does it need to be demolished? Can it be renovated? If so, how can we sell it? We have a sales department that actually pushes those houses back out. We have an entire legal team that helps us make sure that we're selling the houses with clear title. We have a communication staff that is spending every day out in the neighborhoods talking to people, making sure that folks understand what programs we have and how you can tap in, how you can actually participate in Detroit's Renaissance or renovation, or however you want to describe it. And we have a really robust team that has now been doing this work for a couple of years and is getting better at it every day.
All right, I need to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the nuts and bolts, some of the questions that people probably ask you the most. Can an empty lot be purchased behind your home?
So we have a program called the Side Lot Program. It's one of our most popular. It's people really do like it. If you have a lot behind that touches yours, behind it or next to it, there are some other criteria it needs to meet. You know, you have to be up to date on your taxes. You have to actually be the owner of the home. You don't have to. You have to be the owner of the home. And if it qualifies as a side lot, we can sell that lot to you for $100.
Okay. Roughly how many homes do you have out there to be able to purchase that in good enough shape to purchase and start working?
Well, we have about 28,000 structures total in our inventory, but a lot of those are actually slated for demolition. At any given time, we have about 300 houses listed on our website for sale. We auction 4 houses a day. And we also have another sales platform called Own It Now, and you can go on our website at buildingdetroit.org, and the Own It Now platform works more like just a bid. You put your best and final offer in, that bid stays open for 72 hours, and if no one else counteracts your bid, that property becomes yours.
Okay, say I go out, I purchase a home, I come up with the money, whatever the down payment is. I've got, what, 6 months to bring it up to code?
Yeah. So one of the things I like people to know about the land bank homes is we we require you to invest in the home once you get it. It has to be brought up to code and it has to be occupied in order to qualify. That's part of every single transaction that we make. We are not out here to encourage other people to speculate on land. You can't buy a property from us and then just sit on it for a number of years. You actually have to invest in it. So the standard time is 6 months to bring that house into compliance, or 9 months if it's in a historic district.
Okay.
You know, as long as you're making steady progress, we'll work with you to get that property up to code, but ultimately
Monthly updates?
Has to be monthly updates, it has to be secure, it has to be clean, it has to not be a blight on the neighborhood, and we have about 2,000 homes that right now have been purchased and are working through that compliance process.
Stories have been done about squatters. We know that doesn't happen in every neighborhood, but there are some neighborhoods where that's happening more than in other neighborhoods. How do you deal with that? That's got to be a nightmare.
So we have a program called buyback. So if you find yourself living in a home that is owned by the land bank, we urge you to contact us, because we have a program that would allow you to purchase it. You know, oftentimes we found that we have people living in our homes that come into our inventory through tax foreclosure, and they were paying rent to a landlord, and the landlord wasn't paying taxes in it. And through no fault of their own, that property becomes publicly owned. Our buyback program allows you work with us for a year to save up enough money to pay your taxes in advance, and then you can buy that structure from us for $1,000. So we really encourage people to contact us, because we'd like people to be actually homeowners, not squatters. We also have, we're working with a number of nonprofits. So in the case where somebody either doesn't qualify for buyback or actually isn't interested in becoming a homeowner, we're partnering with a number of nonprofits to find a way to keep people in these houses.
The Genesee plan. How much of that have you adapted, or are you doing your own thing and trying to come up with it?
So, like Detroit, Flint also has a demolition program funded the same mechanism that we have. But what we've learned is, you know, Flint has some of the same issues, but we have so many more properties to deal with that we've had to scale up in a way that's very different from than the way that Flint has been able to manage theirs.
No, you're working with a lot of banks
Yeah.
to be able to get people the money that they need to be able to purchase these homes. If they have the interest, they need the loans to be able to do it. Talk a little bit about that program, where they can get all the information, because I know it's more than we have time for here, but can they go to a website, do all of those things, and are there some very creative programs out there to help the individuals? So
yeah, I think actually, because people know that we sell properties directly, and some of them, you know, bidding starts at $1,000, that we do a lot of cash sales, but you can also actually get financing too, like you could on any other traditional housing purchase. So if you go to our website, there are a number of resources listed there. We are not in the business of endorsing any particular bank or bank program, but we really do want to connect people up with those programs that are available. And so our website at buildingdetroit.org has a number of those listed. And people are going to need resources to either mortgage their property, to invest in their property, to do the renovation. And we know a lot of Detroit banks are really interested in partnering with us and partnering with new homeowners to make sure that they can get that done. Special thanks to all of my guests today. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the spotlight. We hope you have a great week.